It's the 14th of May 1941. Bismarck, Hitler's largest and most powerful battleship, is heavily leaking fuel as she steams quickly for France. She's just sank the pride of the Royal Navy, the mighty HMS Hood, in only 3 minutes, and is now being chased across the Atlantic by 16 British warships, hell-bent on revenge. She's a formidable adversary, but today she'll be put to the test as the British will fire over 2,000 shells at her. This is the story of her incredible last stand, the heroic sailors on both sides, and strangely, a rather angry cat called Unsinkable Sam. (1941), nearly 2 years into World War II, the British have been ejected from Europe by the Germans and are being brutally bombed by the Luftwaffe. Trapped on their island, supplies have become so scarce that it's made a criminal offence to waste food, punishable with imprisonment. Britain's survival depends on a vital maritime artery to America, which provides 50% of their food and all their oil. German U-boat wolf packs, though, wreak havoc on the convoys, sinking 30 to 50 supply ships a month, and if German capital ships like Bismarck were to make it into the Atlantic, Britain's supplies could be severed entirely. The Royal Navy's home fleet establishes a fragile blockade to prevent this, but their forces are spread perilously thin, with British ships desperately needed in the Mediterranean to counter the Germans and Italians invading Crete. The blockade must hold. The Italians fight hard, but they don't have the fanatical love of death and glory of the Germans. The Germans mean it, and any mistakes against them were usually fatal. Bismarck was laid down in 1936, and every part of her was designed to be superior to the most powerful of British warships. Her main armament was 4 super-firing batteries wielding twin Schnellade-Kanone quick-loading 15-inch guns. Siemens built state-of-the-art fire control computers for them, giving her unprecedented accuracy for the time, a shell a minute, up to 36 kilometers. For close range, she had 15cm anti-ship cannons as a rapid-fire defense against destroyers and torpedo boats. Her anti-air defense was coordinated by these Wackeltopfer tilting pot directors that were gyro-stabilized so ranges could be calculated accurately even in heavy seas. The ship's commanders controlled the battle from the forward command tower and command station aft. These had incredibly thick armor. Just look at their doors, they were 8 inches thick. The technology on board was cutting edge. In her nose there was an array of Gruppenhochgerät hydrophones which could detect convoys up to 100 kilometers away. She could even repel magnetic mines and torpedoes with the MES self-protection strips that ran down her sides. A few months earlier, under Operation Berlin, the German warships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau managed to sneak past the blockade and sink 22 Allied ships in just 2 months. Following this success, the High Command of the German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, decided that Bismarck's first mission, supported by heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, would be to also break into the Atlantic. It would be called Operation Rheinebunk. Hitler, anxious about losing the national flagship, was initially kept in the dark. 2 commanders, Lütjens, operational control, and Lindemann, tactical control, known to work well together, were selected for the mission. The window for opportunity was very limited. The monstrous British aircraft carrier Victorious was nearly operational, and the US had begun sending Catalina C patrol bombers, which would significantly strengthen the blockade. On the 19th of May 1941, the decision is made to leave Gotenhaven. The aim is for Bismarck to remain undetected as long as possible, so she can sneak far north around the Denmark Strait, where she'd be less likely to encounter British warships. The first stop is Grimstad Fjord, so air reconnaissance can be done over the British naval base at Scapa Flow. Unfortunately, whilst passing up the coast, Bismarck is spotted by Swedish cruiser Gotland, and then after arriving, Spitfire pilot Michael Suckling manages to snap a second picture of her, even though 2 Bf-109 fighters circled her to protect her. British Admiral John Tovey orders the Denmark Strait to be reinforced by HMS Hood, Prince of Wales and 6 destroyers under the command of Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland. 7:30 p.m. on the 21st of May, Bismarck departs for the Atlantic. The weather's turning in the Germans' favour. Severe icing, turbulence as high as 20,000 feet, snow, rain and fog below the clouds. There's no way Allied planes can intercept in these conditions, and with radar in its infancy, Bismarck in the vast ocean will be like a needle in a haystack. Theoretically, the Germans knew Bismarck was a fearsome adversary for British capital ships. 70% of her armour was deemed impervious to the standard British 15-inch shell. Like Hood, she had a central armoured citadel, but her main armour belt was next-generation face-hardened Krupp cemented elastic, with its elastic nature helping to reduce spalling inside the ship. The deck was made with homogeneous Wotan, Weich and Hart armour, and was considerably stronger than Hood's with better ductile and tensile properties. It was basically stretchier to absorb plunging fire. It also sloped underneath the main armour belt to stop any shells that penetrated. Her multiple layers of deck armour helped to decap armour-piercing shells, reducing their penetration. Although Hood had been upgraded, she was built for World War I when long-range plunging fire was incredibly inaccurate and lacked some of this critical deck protection. Bismarck was a formidable opponent, and the British knew she must be engaged very carefully. Hood and Prince of Wales arrive at the Denmark Strait. Bismarck has already been detected by the radars of British cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk. They're too small to engage her, alone, so are trailing from a safe distance. Admiral Holland aboard the Hood weighs his options. Either he must also trail Bismarck with the risk she outruns them, or attack. But the seas are so choppy, Norfolk, Suffolk and the accompanying destroyers are unlikely to be effective. Holland makes the decision, probably the only one he could. Bismarck must be stopped at all costs from escaping and engaging the merchant convoys. Holland knows Hood has weaker armour, especially on the deck, and that he must approach Bismarck directly to reduce the risk of long-range plunging fire. The problem with charging in is that only 10 of Hood's 15 guns can train on Bismarck. Regardless, 24th of May, 1941, at 5:52 AM, Hood and Prince of Wales opened fire at 24 kilometres. Bismarck is hit by 3 14-inch shells from Prince of Wales. The first passes entirely through the bow, flooding the fuel distribution system manifolds, depriving Bismarck of 1,000 tons of fuel oil. The second explodes low against the torpedo bulkhead. Fragments penetrate the port forward turbo generator and boiler room. Speed has to be reduced to 28 knots. The third demolishes the stern of Lindemann's motor launch. For 3 minutes, Lutyens watches as shells splash around Bismarck, biding his time for the perfect opportunity. Lindemann impatiently tells him, "Ich lasse mir das nicht mein Schiff unter dem Arsch wegschießen. Feuererlaubnis." The first shell from Prince Eugen hits Hood's boat deck, setting the up anti-aircraft rocket launchers on fire. Holland asks why the fires haven't been put out yet. The engineering team responds, "When it stops exploding, we will." The second shell from Bismarck hits the spotting top, showering the deck with body parts and debris, leaving Hood without central fire control. Another salvo straddles Hood. Bismarck is ranged. The third shell from Prince Eugen hits near the base of the forward superstructure, entering a room with 200 sailors, killing them all. As part of the 5th salvo, a 380mm 800kg shell cuts through the deck like butter, piercing the engine room. Red-hot shrapnel splinters burst through the bulkhead into the adjacent powder magazine. Cordite beneath the 15-inch turret X ignites, causing deflagration in turret Y of 112 tons of cordite. Initially, the armoured deck confines the powder magazine disaster. The ship's crew only hear a quiet, crackling sound. As the pressure builds, flames pass up the aft engine room vents, and suddenly, a spectacular firestorm bursts through the deck. There's an instant reduction in the structural integrity of the hull, and the ship is ripped in half. The force is that great, light debris pellet the Prince of Wales half a mile away. Mortally wounded, back broken, Hood reels 6 to 7 degrees to starboard, then capsizes to port, with secondary explosions devastating the rear of the ship as the hot boilers contact the seawater. Her bow rises vertically, and as her turrets point to the sky, the doomed gunners in turret Y fire a salvo. A final salute to the greatest British warship of the time. Now facing 2 German capital ships with a partially trained crew, Prince of Wales turns and flees, but not before a Dutch shell strikes the bridge, killing everyone except Captain John Leach and one other. Alone in the water, there float 3 survivors: Ted Briggs, Bill Dundas and Robert Tilburn. Tilburn was lying down adjacent to Hood's forward funnel when the ship disintegrated around him. Caught on an aerial mast and nearly dragged down with the undertow, they managed to cut themselves free, and air bubbles from the boiler explosions pushed them to the surface. The destroyer, HMS Electra, picks them up and turns away with a heavy heart. 1,415 men have died. Ted Briggs later stated he last saw Holland sitting in his admiral's chair in utter dejection, making no attempt to escape from the sinking wreck. In the UK, Winston Churchill speeds back to London. He's furious, exclaiming, "British battleships do not turn away from the enemy. There must be retribution for the Hood."
We must now devote all our strength and resources to the completion of our tasks, both at home and abroad. Advance Britannia! Long live the cause of freedom! God save the King!
Meanwhile, in the Atlantic, Bismarck is heavily leaking oil. Lutyens decides she must return to France for repairs. Churchill has scrambled every available ship to hunt down Bismarck. Carrier Victorious, battleship King George V and battlecruiser Repulse head to cut her off, whilst Norfolk, Suffolk and the wounded Prince of Wales trail out of range. Even though she's slowed by the damage, Bismarck is still a very fast ship. With the British ships having to zigzag in fear of U-boat attacks, she soon breaks radar contact. Prince Eugen splits away to continue alone into the Atlantic. It's looking like Bismarck is home free. But it's then that Lutyens makes a critical error. Unfamiliar with the new radar systems, he doesn't realise the British have lost Bismarck and sends a desperate 30-minute situation report to the German Admiralty. The British at Croft Spa intercept this and triangulate the messages, plotting Bismarck's course. By some miracle, they've got a chance to intercept, but incredibly, the coordinates are accidentally plotted on a Mercator rather than Nomic chart, so the British forces actually turn in the wrong direction away from Bismarck. At this point, there's no ship that can catch the Germans. They're spotted by a Catalina flying boat, allowing the British to correct their course, but they're hundreds of miles ahead. Looking at the charts, the British see there is perhaps one tiny possibility. Bismarck will pass briefly through the flight range of their newly finished aircraft carrier Victorious. She has a brand new crew of inexperienced swordfish torpedo bombers. The mission will be perilous. They'll be up there exposed to the freezing winds, desperately trying to operate the wireless, with the extra fuel tank rammed into the long cockpit behind, drowning them in fumes. Ditching in the ocean would mean certain death. 15 brave pilots launch. Tossed around like leaves in the heavy storm, they fly to the limit of their range. Through the cloud and rain, they see what they think is Bismarck and attack. Turns out it's actually the British ship Sheffield who's moved ahead to trail Bismarck. Fortunately, the swordfish have new magnetic detonators on their torpedoes which prematurely explode, and a terribly sporting Sheffield takes evasive action and holds fire. Somehow, all the pilots manage to return to Victorious. The planes are hastily refueled, torpedoes fixed, and they're ready to set off again. This is their last chance to strike. To defend herself, Bismarck angles her main batteries into the water in front of the planes, creating huge splashes, Olympic pool tons of water being displaced into the sky, with disintegrating shells splintering shrapnel like 30mm shotguns. Most of the torpedoes miss, but at 8:47 PM, in a 1 in a million chance, one hits Bismarck directly on her rudder. The 200 kilograms of TNT decimates the steering complex, the hull acting like a springboard, causing a transient whip through the ship. The poor quality welding of the time has no chance against that kind of force, and the stern of the ship partially collapses onto the rudders, jamming them 12 degrees to port. Bismarck can no longer steer. As night falls, Lindemann tells the men they can take what they want from the stores. Tinned ham, cheese in tubes, chocolates, all washed down with brandy. Bismarck is alone. Nothing has the range to assist her. Attempts to cut away the rudder have failed, and explosives risk damaging the propellers. She's sailing in a curve, straight back into the Allied ships. Lutyens reports, "Ship unable to maneuver. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." Morale collapses. Fear and despair rolls through the crew. They know dawn brings death. There is no escape. Creeping from the darkness, against orders, comes the tiny Polish destroyer, Pierun, Thunderbolt. The Polish, they'd attack anyone after the brutal occupation and invasion of their nation. A sixth of the size of Bismarck, Pierun signals, "I am Pole," then charges, blasting Bismarck in her superstructure with her 4.7-inch guns. Pierun's guns can do little to Bismarck's armour, but her captain Pulaski knows that by harrying her through the night, she'll wear down the Germans' morale. She only vanishes back into the darkness as her fuel reserves begin to run low. As dawn breaks, a tired Lindemann sits eating a breakfast of black bread, cheese and ham. At 8:47 AM, his gunnery officer notices a twinkle, followed by a quiet crack in the distance. He begins counting out loud. Lindemann stands and tells him to stop. It's the first shell from Rodney. It'll reach them in 55 seconds, but it's best not to know exactly when it will hit. Bismarck, virtually stationary in the water, is surrounded by 16 British ships. Over the next hour, they'll fire 2,817 shells at her, of which up to 400 hit. The gale force conditions and difficulty steering mean she'll only manage to return one accurate barrage of shells that straddle Rodney. These are some of the critical hits she likely suffered. 8-inch shells from Norfolk and Dorsetshire shear the forward radar director and destroy the starboard 37 and 105mm mounts. Another causes a significant internal explosion of the port 150mm turret. One of Bismarck's own shells explodes in Dora's barrel. A shell, likely from King George V, blows the 1,000-ton turret Bruno upwards, blasting off its rear armour plate and pitching the turret forwards in its barbette. Sailors begin jumping overboard. One man stands on turret B, waving his arms in semaphore. "We want to parley." The deck is piled with mountains of flesh and bone. Panicked sailors fall through the shell holes into the inferno below. The high striking velocities causes a lot of shells to bounce off the water and shatter, devastating the superstructure but leaving the citadel intact. 9:02 AM, a 16-inch shell from Rodney strikes Bismarck's forward command tower. The impact blows the door off and the concussion kills everyone inside. This likely caused the death of Lindemann and Lutyens. By 9:31 AM, all but one turret is out of action. The order is given for Measure V, for sank, scuttling. Bismarck will not fall into the hands of the Royal Navy. The engineering crew begins placing dynamite on the sea valves and flooding pumps. 9:50 AM, with the watertight doors blocked by debris, Joseph Stats climbs up the communications tube to the destroyed forward command tower. His friends Moritz and Seifert follow behind him. As a member of the engineering team, he's yet to see the damage suffered by the upper decks. As he exits the vent, a 16-inch shell from Rodney explodes against the outside armour, knocking him to the ground and stunning him. Spalled shrapnel has cut an 8-inch wound in his shoulder. Fortunately, he had worn his leather jacket. His friends only had their undershirts on. A lieutenant, Friedrich Cardinal, stumbles over. "They get you, Stats?" Moritz is groaning. He has a severe shrapnel wound to his chest. They prop him against the wall, but he dies shortly afterwards. Stumbling outdoors in the cold Atlantic wind, they hear again the distant boom of the British ships firing. Seifert panics, loses his senses and makes a mad jump for the water. It's not far enough, and he's impaled on the sharp metal below. There's nothing Stats can do. He spots a route to the water down over the middle 150mm turret. They pass a heavily wounded officer laying at the port bridge wing. There's no way of saving him. Seconds later, an 800-kilogram shell crushes him, sweeping him away. Making it down to the Aufbau deck, they jump over the burning holes to the turret. Stay together in the water, keep calm, don't give up hope, and be careful when interrogated by the enemy. They leap into the freezing Atlantic. At 10:35 AM, the scuttling charges detonate, and the guns of the British ships fall silent. Dorsetshire makes a final pass, torpedoing Bismarck as she lists heavily 20 degrees to port. This is probably close to how she looked before she sank. Dorsetshire stayed at the location to find survivors, but only 85 could be pulled from the water before a U-boat sighting causes her to leave. A while later, HMS Cossack passes by. There's few men left, most stood drowned in the 8-degree waters. Others, indoctrinated to believe the British would torture them, had shot themselves. With all belief dead, the British turn away. But suddenly, movement is spotted on a small plank of wood, followed over the crashing of the waves by a tiny meow. As the sailors move closer, they see there's a little black and white cat floating there, defiantly, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Quite an angry cat, they found as they plucked him out of the water. Somehow he'd managed to escape unharmed from Bismarck. The Germans had named him Oscar, but with the British crew not knowing that, he became Sam. And Sam really was unsinkable. A little while later, the ship that rescued him, the Cossack, sank. Again, he was plucked off a little raft in the ocean, whereupon he was moved to Ark Royal, which also sank, and there was Sam, floating about again with 6 of his 9 lives still intact. Either he was terribly lucky, or unlucky, I guess, or some kind of German sabotaging super spy. It's possible. Bismarck was a handsome warship, defiant and proud, but the Kriegsmarine were too small, lacking the critical mass and mastery of the sea to beat the Royal Navy. It was decided to never risk battleships again, raiding the Atlantic. As the Japanese discovered with Yamato, aircraft carriers were beginning to dominate the seas. If the money building Bismarck had been spent on tanks or U-boats, it would have likely had a much greater impact on the war. As Admiral Tovey reported though, Bismarck put up a gallant fight against impossible odds, worthy of the old days of the German Navy, and went down with her colours flying. In the Navy you weren't having to kill civilians, women and children. Aboard the Dorsetshire there was mutual respect, great affection even for the old sweats from the German crew who were just doing their job, and great sadness for the 1,415 men on Hood and 2,086 on Bismarck who died. No man is an island, entire of itself. Each is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind.